This episode is brought to you in part by the Table Podcast from the Hendricks Center at Dallas Theological Seminary. I'm Darrell Bach, one of the hosts, and I invite you to join us as we discuss issues of God and culture, which includes anything and everything. Listen on your podcast app or at dts.edu/thetable.
Hey friends, welcome to the Grace Enough podcast. I am your host, Amber Cullum. Each episode, I sit down with a guest to discuss their life journey and how the grace of God has impacted them along the way. After listening to today's episode, I hope you are encouraged that God can use you right now in the midst of your day-to-day life. Yes, it requires daily surrender and trust, but we must remember His grace is enough. Welcome to episode 70. Today I sit down with the founder of Better Life Bags, Rebecca Smith. Are you wondering why someone would name her business Better Life Bags? Well, today you will find out. Rebecca's first book, A Better Life, Slowing Down to Get Ahead, also releases today, May 19th, 2020. I have watched Better Life Bags grow from a small Etsy shop to a company that makes custom leather bags while hiring women from different cultures, faiths, and backgrounds that all live in her city of Hamtramck, Michigan. Listen to what Rebecca has to say about keeping your dreams alive while you wait.
Think right now, whoever's listening, what is something that you wish that you could do or that you want to do more of? It can be something as small as, I wish I had more time to read a novel. Or I wish that I could grow a cookie business. It could be big, it could be small, but we often feel like we don't have. It either has to be we go after it now or we don't do anything at all. I feel like those are kind of the two options that are out there in the world. Is we see people hustling super hard and hiring babysitters full time so they can dedicate 100% of their efforts to this dream of theirs of opening a business. Or we see people say well, right now I'm just going to stay at home. And that's fine if that's honestly what God has given them. But if it's not, if this is just a cop-out, I can't do that because I have young kids. I feel like both are not, they're not right. And so the way that the business grew was right along with my kids and right along with my family. And I said no to a lot of big hustle things that probably could have made Better Life Bags a lot bigger than it is right now, had I said yes to it and had I hustled. But I wasn't willing to not be involved in my kids' life.
After listening to today's episode, I hope you realize there is great value in taking the next small step, in responding to the Spirit's still small voice within you, and in assigning a mission to almost anything you do. Good morning, Rebecca. Thank you so much for being on the Grace Enough podcast.
Hi, Amber. It's so nice to see you again.
I know. It's been a while. We're going to just jump right in and we'll talk a whole lot more about our story and just a brief connection that we had years ago. But go ahead, introduce yourself and your family to our listeners and tell everybody a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So my name's Rebecca Smith. I am married and have 4 kids ranging from age 10 all the way down to age 1. So we have quite the age range. And we live in a little city in the middle of Detroit, Michigan called Hamtramck. And we run a business here. We've lived here now for 10, maybe 11 years now.
Wow.
It's been, and we, have run the business. The business has kind of grown up from a hobby all the way into this full-blown actual real live business.
Right. And you all are a retail storefront at this point. You have been for a while, but that's kind of evolved over the years as well.
Yeah, we still do majority of our sales online, but we do open our workshop. We have a little retail spot in front that we open up every Saturday for people to come in and see the bags that we make.
That's so cool. Now, is it right in the city or is it close to your house? Where is the actual storefront?
Both. So it is, Hamtramck is only 2 square miles. So it's a tiny little city, but it's full of people, very urban. We're right smack dab in the middle of Detroit. But we somehow years ago, they remained their ownership of their city when Detroit was gobbling up neighborhoods. The storefront is in Hamtramck and then our house is a mile away. So
okay. Well, tell me, before we really dig into Better Life Bags, how did you come to know Jesus? What has your faith journey looked like?
Yeah, so my parents became believers in college through Campus Crusade.
All right.
Yeah, which
Shout
I was
out to
also
Crew.
involved with. Yeah, I was involved with that in college too. So it's kind of a fun full circle event. So they raised us kids, teaching us the gospel from like very young age. My dad grew up very strict Catholic, and so we actually joined the Catholic Church, or my mom did, to, in order to marry him. They were both believers. They both believed that Jesus, was paid the penalty for our sins, was the way to heaven. But we remained in the Catholic Church for up until I was in 8th grade. And my mom and dad would always tell us, and this is true no matter what church you go to, but for me it felt special that we were going to the Catholic Church to tell people about Jesus. And I thought that was so such a neat mission, which I really growing up, I realize now there are people who don't follow Jesus. Every church. Yeah, I've realized as I've grown older, there's people in every church that need to hear about Jesus. That's not true of just the Catholic faith. But that was kind of our mission field growing up. And so I had this purpose and this mission in going to CCD class every Sunday. And I honestly wasn't hearing much about Jesus
interesting.
in the church. It was from my parents at home that I learned the most. But when we got to 8th grade, I started fighting my parents on wanting to go. I was bored, none of my friends went to that church. And so my parents thought, okay, for the sake of, our kids, let's go to kind of a church that has a vibrant youth group. And so we transitioned at that point to just more like non-denominational Bible-based church. And that's where I finished the rest of my high school, college age type church going to, and just really then seeing, this is what vibrant relationship with Jesus looks like, seeing that in my youth group leaders, in some of my friends. And really that became my social group, of course. Right. And just kind of the environment I grew up in. And still kind of all along I heard people talk about personal relationship with Jesus. And I was like, what does that even mean? We can't see him. We can't how do you have this personal relationship with God? But at that point, I had been a Christian for so long, I had been saved, the salvation, I'd prayed the salvation prayer so long ago. And then I felt like I had to have this second, how do I make him now Lord of my life? Yeah. So there was this salvation moment when I was young, and then in college, or even I would probably say right after college, I really figured out what it meant to give my whole life to Jesus and develop that relationship through reading the word and prayer. And that's how he speaks to us, and that's how we speak to him. And the Bible is so living and so alive, and random verses from the Old Testament I would read and it would apply to something I was going through in my life. Yeah. I was like, oh, this is what people mean. This is the relationship part that I feel like I've been missing throughout high school and college. And honestly, I was too embarrassed to ask anybody, how do you have that personal relationship? Because I was put into leadership of all these youth groups, so I'm I'm supposed to have these answers. And
I think that can be just almost the things to be cautious or to caution our kids about that grow up in the church, because you do feel like you should have all these answers and, because I've been in the church, then I should be farther along maturity wise. And the more and more people that I talk to, the more and more I realize that it really is just some of that happens with age and repetition. Mm-hmm. It's not, I wasn't saved.
For sure.
It was your own personal faith development that honestly I think happens whether you get saved at age 4 or you get saved at age 20. It's just by the time you're older, you can put different language to it. And I don't need to be resaved. I just need to repent of my rebellion.
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely just a repetition. You're learning to read God's word so you get closer to him. The next time you read it, you learn more about him.
Exactly.
Just a deepening. Well, as we jump into talking about Better Life bags, I just think back to when we were, both bloggers and you were just starting on this path. And I mean, I didn't continue to do anything with mine per se, but I've watched Better Life bags grow over the years. And so take us back to when you were a young mom back in Savannah, Georgia, and just how did y'all end up moving from Savannah to Michigan? And then we'll go right into what happened after that.
Yeah. So I started that blog. It's like Better Life blog, or I don't even remember what it was called.
I mean, that's been like 12 years ago.
12 years. Yeah, 12 years. I started at the same time, maybe 11. It's somewhere between 11 and 12. It gets foggy. Who knows?
Listen, 4 kids later. Amen, sister.
A long time ago, way back in the day. I had been a teacher. I taught 5th grade. That was my degree from college, and always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. Got pregnant with Jonah, who's now 10. He's 10 and a half. And made my first diaper bag, and then posted pictures on Facebook, and people were like, you should sell these. Have you heard of Etsy? You should open an Etsy shop. And I was like, what is Etsy?
Yeah, I know.
Etsy? I didn't even know. But it was so easy to open a shop. So I just went ahead and did it. And then really blogging was really starting around that time. And I loved reading blogs. And I was like, oh, this would be a fun thing for me to do and kind of tag it on to the shop. I was giving microloans with each bag purchase to a woman who was in a third world country. It's like, I can blog about her story and which customer bought which bag and who that bag is going to help. So the Better Life bags, it was always called that. The mission has evolved over time, but it started with microloans. And so, I enjoyed social media and I enjoyed blogging, and it was very natural for me to kind of do both. And then I just copied what people did. I think we did giveaways together back on our and the
so
link,
crazy.
the linkies. What were those things where you link up your
oh my gosh, I don't even remember that. I mean, I know what you're saying. Now I'm thinking,
link parties or it was
gosh.
age
but
old.
Did it start while you were in Savannah?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. See, in my mind, and even after reading the book, which we'll talk a little bit too, that's getting ready to come out and tell the whole story. Even reading it, I was thinking you didn't start until you were in Michigan.
Yeah, it started in Savannah. Only about 6 months in Savannah, I will say. So it was definitely still a hobby. I never imagined it would be a business at that point. But I opened the Etsy shop in Savannah, started the blog in Savannah. 6 months into that, we moved to Michigan, to this little city called Hamtramck. And our point in doing that was we were going to live here for 2 years, kind of immerse ourselves in a different culture. This city is very diverse. It's Michigan's most diverse city. There's 26 languages spoken here in 2 square miles.
It's amazing.
It's, the signs are in Arabic and Bengali, it's just very diverse. And so we thought before we wanted to be overseas and do missions work. So we thought before we make a huge jump overseas, let's move somewhere that has a bigger diversity, more diversity than Savannah. Georgia. Learn a language. Yeah, than the South. No offense to the South, but there's not much diversity there. And so we came to Hamtramck with a goal of being here for just 2 years. So we were maybe going to learn a language, try to make friends with people who didn't look like us, because all of our friends up until that point looked exactly like us. And so it was supposed to be this really easy 2-year stop, and then we'd head overseas. And it was the hardest year of my life. I had no idea that I would rebel in the way that I did. To say
what do
the
you
least.
mean when you say that, rebel?
We got here. I had a newborn, so I'm in the newborn fog. I guess
girl.
Jonah was 6 months, but he's still.
That's a newborn fog.
Yeah.
Unless you had the absolute dream baby. Well, and maybe even with the dream baby, I don't know, because I didn't have one of those.
Yeah. We We don't know what that's like. Yeah. I ended up getting pregnant the month we were here too. Like, so, and then I was having like second baby surprisingly like close together. But really, I think I would have struggled even without all of that. Like, I was suddenly I thought we were moving, honestly, I thought I was delaying the jump overseas by like moving somewhere here in America first. I wasn't ready to do the whole mission thing. Like Neil, when we got engaged, he said, I think that we should move to Iraq. And I was like, excuse me? Like, put on, and all this is in the book, like the whole story of this. I was like, you want to take me to a war zone? Like,
I didn't sign up for that.
No. And I was so glad we were just engaged. We weren't married yet. And I just went back to God and I was like, this guy is the one that you want me to marry? And, through like reading the word, God really opened my eyes to his heart for the world. And I had always just kind of been like focused on America and the needs in America, and did inner city camps, in college. I loved the inner city. Yeah. And like kids camps and different things like that. But I had never imagined myself going overseas for missions. But I knew God had this heart for the world, and I was willing to follow that if that's what, his plan for our life was. But I was terrified, So moving somewhere in America to me was like, okay, I still have 2 more years before like this jump. But we might as well have just gone overseas. Like the way there's nothing in Hamtramck that looked like anything I was used to. Target is like 20 minutes away. Starbucks is 15 minutes away. There's no Kroger, like there's just nothing. There's markets, and a lot of the women are from Yemen. They're the Muslim culture. I should say, I don't think I've mentioned that yet. Like the city is mostly made up of Muslim people. And so they cover, they're very conservative. So they cover in an abaya with, everything's covered in black except for their eyes. I was not expecting that. So when we drove through Hamtramck, and I was like, just embarrassingly to say now, but just like taken aback by where I was. Yeah. It's a very poor economic area. So every other house was boarded up, burned down. It felt like a movie set that I was moving to. And I just ran every chance that I could, like to the surrounding suburbs that felt normal and comfortable to me. So Jonah and I would just take Jonah and I'd go to the mall and just hang out there until it was time to go to bed, and then come back. And not surprising, 6 months of that routine, I'm breaking down, telling Neil, like, I'm so sorry. Like, we've made a huge mistake. I can't do this. Like, let's forget about overseas. Like, I can't even do this city. And he opened the book of Jonah and was like, I just want you to read this. I was like, oh man, I was
bringing up that Nineveh business.
But it was what I needed in that time, was to see God has called us to this city, like he called Jonah, and I'm running the other direction, like every single day. And so I just start this experiment of just like staying in the city and waking up and like walking to the markets here and pushing Jonah in a stroller here and just staying and trying to see what happens. Like Neil, I think specifically said, like, what if God has a really cool story for you here and you're missing out on it? And I was like, okay, I'll try, like I'll see, because I don't want to miss out on it.
Well, I'm thinking back now, it's almost like God, his faithfulness just never ceases to captivate me. Yeah. Because in the moment, it feels like we just want to run. We want to hide. We want to keep ourselves super, super busy so that we don't have to deal with our own heart issues. Yeah. And even though it's like, as you mature in your faith, if you continue doing that, you're going to have all these regrets. Yeah. Or you can just kind of surrender and press through, and you're going to be like, God, you're faithful. You provide every time. Why do I always fight you?
I know. Yeah. And I think, like, more than anything, when people read the book, that's what I want them to close, like to finish the chapter see, not often do we get to see a 10-year story, until we've walked it, until we can look back 10 years and be like, oh, that's why this happened, or that's why this happened. I want to know now, whatever I'm going through now, that in 10 years, I can look back on it and be like, this is the better life. Like what I'm living now, like this is the good life that God has for me. Right. He promises that he has good plans for us, that we just have to walk in them. And sometimes they're easy and exciting things to walk into. And sometimes they're really hard and terrible. And we're asking why all the time. But they're good. Both of them are good plans. So the book is kind of the whole story of how it was hard, the hard things we go through, but then God did have a really fun story for me. And
right. Well, like you're walking up and down the streets, you're encountering people all the time that, a lot of them you don't know anything about, completely different cultures, oftentimes completely different languages.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All the while, Better Life Bags is still going on.
Yeah. I'm still like making bags during nap times and bedtimes. It's kind of an escape in a way for me, and yeah.
But you're also getting to a point of like, how can I keep this up, this pace by myself? What, Lord, do you have for me? And so you end up inviting someone in. Mm-hmm. Talk to us a little bit about how that relationship happened, and that it's not like it was all just roses and beauty.
Right.
Early on.
Yeah. So this happened during my experiment time, I will say, like during the time where I was like, I'll just stay and see what happens. So Neil had been learning language, learning Arabic from a man who had a daughter my age. She had 4 kids, and she knew how to sew. And so they both figured that out. And he said, my daughter needs to meet your wife. I'm going to bring her over. They need to arrange a meeting. And so Neil comes home and tells me, I'm like, I don't want to do, like, I don't know what to wear. I don't know what food she likes. I don't know, like, I just didn't know anything.
The fear.
I don't know her language. I don't know anything, but I'll do, like, I was just in this experiment, which that mindset really helped me push through fear. It's just like, this is just to see what happens, and so I invited her over, and like, sure enough, we could barely communicate. We sat awkwardly in my living room, and I eventually was just like, you know how to sew? And she said, like, yeah, because that's the only thing I knew about her.
Yes.
So we went down to our basement where I had set up my little Etsy studio, and we spent just the next hour and a half sewing, which we didn't need to talk for. It was an activity that it was a universal language for us. And so I taught her one of my bags, not thinking anything of it, just help me get out of this awkward situation. Right. This is going to save me. I got her phone number just because it felt like the right thing to do. And then I didn't call her again because I did not want to put myself willingly in that awkward moment. But I'm glad I got her phone number, because I'd say maybe 6 months, a year, everything seems to go in these like 6 months, a year later patterns. The business got way too busy for me. And I was like at a crossroads. Do I shut it down? Do I find a factory overseas? And then I just like, well, maybe there's this third option. I remembered Nadia, who's, sewed with me awkwardly in the basement. And I called her and I asked if I could teach her, like if I could hire her, basically. I was asking her for help. I didn't think in any way that this was going to help her. But I started this routine of visiting her house once a week, bringing the fabric pieces, and then she would sew them together, and I would come back the next week and pick up what she'd done and drop off more fabric. And of course, like in the Yemeni culture, they're very hospitable. So it's never a drop at the door situation. Like you're invited in and you have tea and you have like cookies, and our kids would play together. And we got to know each other. She had learned English, much by watching cartoons, actually, with her kids.
We have some friends in the same thing.
What, with the cartoons?
Yes.
Yeah, she had thankfully learned. We were able to communicate so much better. And I got to know her as a woman and as a wife and as a mom. And I realized that we had so much more in common than I thought. I think I'd even told Neil at one time, I will never be friends with someone from a different culture. Like, it's just impossible, I think I said. And then here I was, like, realizing, like, oh, we both like chocolate. We both like, we both want new kitchen cabinets. We both like walking to the park with our kids. There was a lot we had in common. I just had to make this routine of putting myself in her home once a week, to see that happen. And shortly after, I'm paying her, per bag that she's making, and I start noticing, or she starts showing off different things that she's bought with the money that I gave her, things that I would consider necessities. I think most of us would, like bed frames for her girls instead of like mattresses on the floor, or like a dining room table instead of just eating on the couch. And it really clicked at that moment. I was like, wait, you weren't able to buy this before, but now you are because you've been making bags for me to help me. Like it just clicked in that moment that her life was a lot better because of this income, this like side income that I was providing for her. And then that's when we decided, let's make this, let's try to see how many other women, I'm sure there's other women in our community that
absolutely
for one reason or another can't just go out and get a job at McDonald's or the grocery store, the markets here, but have a need for a job and have a skill and want to work. And so we started intentionally growing at that moment.
Well, and that's really takes us into your mission, because up to this point, you've been doing the micro loans, you have one employee, and the mission kind of stays the same, but also shifts a little bit. So 12 years in, what is the mission of Better Life Bags now?
Yeah, we say that it is to create meaningful work for women in our community. And it's gone through various transformations. I think at one point it was we hire women who have barriers to employment. Well, that didn't sit well with me because yes, they have barriers, but I don't know. I always want it to be empowering for them. Like, I want the job to not feel like a pity party or a charity, I don't know how else to say it. So it's gone
exactly
through
what you mean, though.
I want them to feel like this is a really great place to work. I would choose to work here even if I didn't have a barrier to employment. Or, as they start working, now they have something to put on their resume. They no longer have a barrier to employment. That's right. Like they can go out and get a job at a sewing place anywhere. And so I just started to not sit well with me. So things evolve and change. And maybe in 10 years, creating meaningful work for women in our community won't feel right. And, it will have evolved by then. But that's currently what it is and what we aim to do. So,
well, and even if we're using a different language than barrier, what are some of the things that were prohibiting them from having a job?
Yeah.
Because the reality is, I think a lot of times when we think barrier, people can think, homelessness or, drugs, alcohol addiction. True. And those things can be true, but there's also things like the situation of Better Life Bags where it's maybe you have young children at home and you can't afford childcare.
Right.
So what are some of those that you would say, we've hired women in who are facing these situations?
Yeah. I mean, we've definitely had the young kids at home, can't afford childcare. A lot of our seamstresses choose to work from home, and so they can take their work home and just do it on their own schedule. Language is a big barrier. They don't need to be fluent in English to work at Better Life Bags. We like it if they're in English class, like we have some partnerships with different English classes around town. But that doesn't have to be a requirement, whereas for other jobs, it probably would.
Well, education. It's a stepping stone, like you said. Their ESL, you're wanting to prep them more and more to be able to be a thriving citizen in America.
For sure.
And part of that is your language, just like if we were to move somewhere else.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
Yeah. I mean, you just think about those things.
I think probably the biggest one that people don't always think about, and that's probably specific to our community, which is mostly first-generation immigrants from, like I said, Yemen, Bangladesh, Poland, Bosnia, Syria, Afghanistan, just they kind of land in Hamtramck first before and get their feet, solid before moving out to some of the suburbs. But they're nervous about America and their cultures, especially. It is not accepted for a woman to work outside the home when other men that are not related to them are present. Yeah. It's just not, that's hard for us as Americans to accept. And I know some people will be like, well, that's stupid, but that's their culture. That's what it is. That's just the nature of it. And so to have a place where it's all women, their husbands know that when they walk into this workshop, they're not going to be working with other men. It feels like a safe place for them to go to. And so that's probably one of the biggest barriers from these women just going out and working at the dollar store, is the cultural difference of men and women.
Well, and it's so easy for us to be so quick to judge, oh, well, that's ridiculous that a man or whatever would think that. But it's just like faith, right? You slowly add layers over time. Yeah. And if you're going into a new culture, it's just like anything. It's like learning to ride your bike. You don't just jump on and take off. Yeah. You put your foot out there. You begin to see like, oh, just because women work with men does not mean X, Y, or Z. And that can take, 1 year for some families and 25 years for other families. And so just learning to appreciate and respect that about people.
Yeah, for sure.
Is half the battle for sure. Well, you wrote a whole chapter in your book on really like honing in on this mission statement. It was really convicting to me because Sam and I have talked about, written down things about a family mission statement and have yet to finish it. Why do you feel like it's so important to assign mission to almost everything you're doing in your life?
Well, I don't think you'll ever be finished with your mission statement. So that's part of it. I love that you've even started thinking through it. To me, if I don't have a purpose and a mission behind anything that I do, I feel very aimless. And I wonder why I'm doing it. I think that's always a big question for me is why am I doing what I'm doing? If we can assign mission, just even like, it doesn't need to be like, oh, I need to take this 1-day prayer retreat and decide on a mission for my, right. It can be just in the moment, like, God, why am I doing this? And sometimes maybe he'll answer like, I don't know. Why are you, why are you doing it? Maybe you shouldn't be. Or
truth.
I think for me, like when I think about my kids, the mission of like, I want to raise them to love God and love people. Like it's a very simple one. And so that drives, I think one example I put in the book, it drives my reactions to them. I'm not perfect at this, but if they spill milk, I don't get angry. Like if they knock over their cereal bowl, I don't get angry. If they hurt their siblings' feelings, that's when like the consequences are, because that deals with loving people. Spilling milk doesn't have anything to do with loving people. Now, if they're like throwing milk at their sibling, there's different things. But if it was an accident, my normal instinct is like, why did you, you were flailing your arms. You were being too excited. Just sit and eat your stinking cereal.
I've never said that. Maybe yesterday.
Oh, yeah, right. But if I can remember, like, well, wait, what's my mission here? Like, my mission is to help them learn how to love God and love people. I don't want to waste my discipline on this accident, this like spilled milk, So that's one example, but it can go in all different like friendships and marriage and your work. And even if you work in the corporate world or you feel like your job doesn't have an overall mission statement. Well, what is your mission for going to work? Like maybe your mission is it can change that day. Maybe that day you feel like my mission is just to ask somebody how they're doing really, like really how are they doing?
And it gives conversation.
Yeah. Or your mission is to like leave a note for be the encouraging person that day at work, leave a encouraging note or a chocolate bar. I just think it helps us have purpose and be used as the hands and feet of Jesus. So,
well, and I think a little bit about when you guys ended up moving into, I think it was that you moved into a different house and you took down the fence in your backyard between the homes. And, you know, what was the mission there? What was your idea that you certainly had to stay focused on? Because, again, it didn't just happen that day. It was more of a, okay, we're buying this house that requires some work. And, but what's our overall mission? How can we stay focused on that to where when you get frustrated, it's something you can look to and say, okay, this is the main goal.
Yeah. So when we were looking for a house, it was really hard to find a house in Hamtramck that fit all of my desires and needs. God totally provided it. I won't go into all the details, but it really feels like a miracle to me that he provided this house when I didn't think it existed. And we wanted to live in community and we wanted to love our neighbors. And there already was not a fence on one side. I think the house next to us was like a mother-in-law house at one time or something. So there was never a fence between those yards. But then a family moved in on the other side that kind of had a similar reason of being in Hamtramck. They were starting like an urban farm and really wanting to provide jobs in that way for the community, as well as like obviously fresh fruit and vegetables. And our kids were about the same age. And we just really wanted to model like what it looks like to love each other, have community. And we took down the fence between our yards and our kids just run. We have this big park back there. It's just another like miracle to me that God gave. But the funny thing is, or the cool part is, our neighbors who are Bengali, they have kids about our kids' age too. One day I was out just gardening and I look up and he's cutting a hole in his fence. And I'm like, no, like, is this really happening? Like, we're going to get all the fences taken down. And he was cutting a hole so that the kids would be able to run now between 4 yards. So and they have a trampoline in their backyard. So it's just, I mean, it's a symbol to me of what we're trying to do in our community. But what I hope we're trying to do all over is just break down the walls and the fences that we put up between people who are different. In whatever way they're different, culturally or age, to take down those fences. It's been a visual reminder to me when I walk out to my backyard of when we do it, then other people want to do it too.
Absolutely. Well, and then kids are they're just such a good example for us, right? They just see people their age and they're like, we're all in.
Yeah.
We just want to play with those people. Well, let's hang out. You live in our neighborhood. You're about our age. You must like to do what I do. So we're going to get together.
True.
It is. It is. We are more alike than different. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes you can't go after your dreams right away. And you know that. You have 4 young kids. What encouragement do you have or motivation do you have for someone who really is just in that place right now of I have this dream, but I just can't go after it right now. And that, it feels almost like you're just grasping at the air.
Gosh, yeah. So I think I have a chapter called Manage the Hustle. And I think that's probably what you're referring to. And I have a chapter called Let It Simmer or something. Something about it simmering.
That's right.
What did I call that? So I do, and I didn't do this intentionally with Better Life Bags, but now that I see what it did in my life, I'm like, oh, there's so much truth there. So I had this desire, and I think just enter in your, think right now, whoever's listening, what is something that you wish that you could do or that you want to do more of? It can be something as small as, I wish I had more time to read a novel. Or I wish that I could grow a cookie business. It could be big, it could be small, but we often feel like we don't have, it either has to be we go after it now or we don't do anything at all. I feel like those are kind of the 2 options that are out there in the world. Is we see people hustling super hard and hiring babysitters full time so they can dedicate 100% of their efforts to this dream of theirs of opening a business. Or we see people say well, right now I'm just going to stay at home. And that's fine if that's like
Yeah.
honestly what God has given them. But if it's not, if this is just a cop out, like I can't do that because I have young kids. I feel
Right.
like both are not, they're not right. And so the way that the business grew was right along with my kids and right along with my family. And I said no to a lot of like
Yeah.
big hustle things that probably could have made Better Life Bags a lot bigger than it is right now had I said yes to it and had I hustled. But I wasn't willing to not be involved in my kid's life. But at the same time, I wasn't willing to let the dream of Better Life Bags die. And so it came to me as I was writing the book that it was really managing the hustle. It was deciding and making a rubric for when will I say yes to an opportunity and when will I say no. And that changes often. Right now in my life, I say no to any opportunity when my husband is in the Army, when he is at drill. If the opportunity lands on a weekend when he's at drill, that's an easy, like hard no, even if it's something I really want to do. You know, like I just feel like that's my rubric right now. There's other little things that I come up with. One quick example is I'm taking this online business school and I really want to do it. And I talked about it a little bit on social media last week, but instead of being like, oh, I can't do that right now in my life, or instead of stopping everything else and just doing it, I've decided 2 hours a week. I'm going to work on it Tuesday and Thursday during my son's nap time. And that's how I manage the hustle. I'm going to get through it slower, but it's going to still be, it's not dead. You know, like I'm still fueling the fire a little bit. I'm letting it simmer until it's time to turn it up to a boil. And, you know, when things are simmering, it can get up to a boil much faster when the time is right than if it's cold water in a pot, you know, that you suddenly like, I need it boiling right now. Like now's the time. This cool opportunity is here. And I need to have had it been boiling. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
I think that makes perfect sense because we seem to think it's an all or none mindset.
For sure.
And it's just not. I mean, there are things that get birthed in us that just do not come to fruition for years and years. And that doesn't mean, like you said, that things aren't being planted and cultivated. It just means the scale of it may not happen for a long time. And we really see that in the Bible. It's so interesting how we let certain ideas ruminate in our brain. But then if you look at God's word, it's like, no, like Moses was a shepherd for like 40 years before he went on this extravagant mission. You know, I mean, there's all these examples of that. You know, Jesus, he's back in the background. What was he doing from that age 12 to 33?
Oh my gosh,
We don't know all of the little tiny steps and decisions we make along the way that is playing into our life, our dream, whatever it may be. So it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
As we begin to close out, what do you feel like are a few lessons that you have learned from working with people who are different from you, from a faith background, from there's just so much more than just religious reasons. There's culture, there's faith, there's appearance, there's just the way the dynamic of your family is set up. What are some things you feel like you have learned from those women?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, the biggest thing, and I feel like maybe I've touched on it, is that we aren't that different, and that it is scary. I mean, I just think, it is, things that are different than us are very scary when we first step into it. But I think the key is going ahead and stepping into it and pushing through the fear to get beyond it. I think one of my favorite stories, because not only have I experienced this, but the women in our workshop have experienced like tearing down those stereotypes and those barriers. And because as much as like I want to say like, oh, white people all stick together. Well, Bengali people all stick together and Yemeni people all stick together and the African American community in our neighborhood sticks together. You know, like that's just, we go towards like people.
That's right. It's very natural for us.
For sure. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what's cool about the workshop, I think, is that God has brought people from tons of different ethnic groups and races and economic statuses. And I remember the first time, this is in the book too, but the first time an African-American woman walked in, I had hired her off the street. Her story is crazy. You'll have to get the book to read it. I feel like that's what Zondervan would want me to say.
Yeah, it's a really good part, though.
Yeah, her story's crazy. And so she's off the street and walking into our workshop, working for her first day. And one of my Bengali seamstresses comes up to me and says, "I'm scared." And I was like, "Why?" And it just kind of hit me like, this is the first time that she has been in a room, like close quarters working relationship with someone who's not of her cultural, like racial, ethnic makeup. And she has been told wrong things about African Americans, you know, and she's never walked through that fear to get to the other side of it. And now they like hug each other and we're praying together and they're holding hands and they're giving each other's food, you know, making food for each other. And it's been very unexpected. I did not think that this is also what Better Life Bags would do, is to break down, not only for myself, but for these women, just kind of the barriers and the fear of somebody different, to get past it.
It's such a great example because of so many different people that I've talked to, people who live in various cultures, people who employ women from various backgrounds. That's almost always what is said, is when you just step into someone else's life and you get to know that person, you realize they are a person.
Yeah.
Just like you. Very rarely is the situation something that you will be continuing to live in fear toward after you know them.
For sure.
And it's just an amazing example of, yes, take the drive, take the step, go in the place, say hello, whatever it may be. So thank you for sharing that. Well, tell everybody where we can find you on social media. It's betterlifebags.com. That's where you can purchase online. But where can we find you other places?
I hang out like 98% of the time on Instagram.
That's right.
So I am Rebecca Smith online there. And yeah, Better Life Bags on Instagram as well.
Yeah, it's really fun to follow Rebecca on Instagram because she's typically posting fun stories or showing you how she's remaking her house a little bit. And I always enjoy, well, because a lot of times I'm like, oh yeah, you know, that dark navy blue does look good. I'm going to do it. I'm doing the dark color. I'm going for it.
Yes.
So thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
If you were intrigued to learn more of Rebecca's story, please click over to wherever you purchase books and search for A Better Life, Slowing Down to Get Ahead. I read the book earlier this year and thoroughly enjoyed Rebecca's writing and reading her full story. If you enjoyed today's episode, or perhaps you have a takeaway or a question, please hop over to Instagram or Facebook and leave a comment at graceenoughpodcast_Amber. As always, it is a joy to interact with my listeners, but hard to do unless we connect on social media. I look forward to chatting with you and seeing you back here next Tuesday.
Thank you for listening to the Grace Enough Podcast. Tune in next time.